thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. We have a bit of a hybrid situation. So we have both online attendees and in person. And today with me, I have two great hosts, Tino Samardjioski, our Senior Security Officer, and Blagoj Kjupev, our Chief Innovation Officer. And they will talk about corporate security and why it's important if you're trying to grow your business, how it can affect the business, how it can affect the reputation and credibility of your company, and guide you through some more general but also a bit more technical aspects that can help mitigate future problems, security risks, and breaches. And without further ado, I'll give the hosting permission to Tino, so you can take it away now.
Thank you, Nicola, for the introduction. As Nicola introduced me, I'm Tino Samardjioski, Senior Security Officer in IT Labs for the last 8 months. I have experience in cybersecurity for the last 12 years. And on this event, we will present, as Nicola said, the corporate security, how an organization should implement from high-level policies and procedures till the low-level proper setup of hardware and software from security aspect. So let's start with the presentation. This is the agenda for today's event, so we can go on one by one. First is difference between information security and cybersecurity. They are very related. Information security is based on the information as a whole, and cybersecurity is more in the protecting the networks, the devices, the programs, and the data from attacks. But information security is everything that is available for an organization. So information security, every company should, it's critical to implement in everyday business, starting from taking approach risk-based, identifying the risks which are necessary to mitigate for one organization to take appropriate technical and organizational measures so they can mitigate those risks in order not to be protected from every kind of attacks or from confidential aspect and other. It's not a one-time process, but it's need to be continual process, like ongoing process. So importance of information security in one organization cannot be overstated. And example for such frameworks in one organization, they are like the ISO standards, ISO 27001. We have also NIST or CIS security controls, which can introduce in one company to proper handling of the information security. You can see the picture. How is it in everyday business? This is the reality in most of the companies. Before the breach, security budget is very low, and after the breach, it's always hiring. Next slide is about information security CIA triad. So CIA means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means that information should be accessed or should not be accessed or read without authorization. So every access should be authorized. And measures that can help to protect confidentiality are restricting access based on least privilege and need to know basis principles, to encrypt the data with non-disclosure agreements, and also physical security measures. The integrity is that information should not be modified or compromised in any way. So the data should remain in its intended state, and integrity can be protected also with identity and access management tools, with file access monitoring, EDS systems, or security event and security information and event management systems. The last is availability. Information should be accessible upon legitimate request, so it should be available at any time at the party needed. So for availability, we have controls like redundancy, backup, business continuity, and etc. Next slide is about data protection. So we have different channels where we should protect the data, different channels. So we have data in transit. That data needs to be protected. So it's like data on the wire. It includes channels like HTTPS, SFTP, IM, P2P, SMTP. So we are always using data protection mechanisms when transferring data through the network. Data protection is, just to say, very related to information security. Now, because of the GDPR, the same technical and organizational measures need to be taken from a company to be compliant with the GDPR, to stay compliant. Sorry. The next stage is the data in use or data in motion. That's the data that resides on the end user workstations. So it also needs to be protected from data leakage with different types of tools like data leakage protection or something. Also the removable media devices and others. Data at rest is the data that resides on the file servers and the databases. It also needs to be monitored from unauthorized parties to be accessed or leaked. Today's challenges and risks in corporate security. Because of the hybrid way of working today, since most of the employees are at their homes, we have new challenges in information security and cybersecurity. So the first is like the bring your own device moment, because now every employee is using their own personal device to connect to corporate networks, like their mobile phones or smartphones, for sure, the maybe personal laptop or tablet. So we have to be careful and implement strict bring your own device policies to be safe on that access. IoT devices, we have a lot of them in our IT environment, in our on premises, so we have to be careful with them, to have clear visibility of them, and to check them for security aspects, not to be a point where attackers can invade. Also, the remote working, we mentioned that it's a hybrid environment, so we have to be sure that it's a secure connection when the employees are accessing to our corporate network, especially from their home routers, because we are not sure how they configure their home routers from their ISPs, right? So we have to take additional measures like VPN security, firewall security, additional measures to check every kind of access which is trying to attend to our network. Visibility and monitoring is connected to this one. We have to have systems that are gathering logs and alerts for suspicious events in order to prevent them or to detect them, and additionally take measures for restricting anything suspicious. The hybrid infrastructure we already mentioned, because at this time we are also using on-premises, we are using cloud services, so it's a hybrid environment. We have to be careful from both aspects and to monitor them both. These are the tools that can help us to improve our cybersecurity hygiene. So the first one is asset discovery, which can help us to fully discover all assets that are in our environment and to maybe detect if any rogue device is trying to connect to the network. And this tool can help us also. It's a it's a tool from licensing aspect and other aspect, not just security. MDM tools or MAM tools are mobile device management or mobile application management. They can support a diversity of different type of assets and operation systems like Android, Apple, Windows, Linux. So we have to take into consideration every kind of operative systems. And we can enforce policies which can help us to ensure that those devices and applications which are used on those devices are compliant with our organizational policies. Log management system or a CM system, as I mentioned before, it's a system where we can collect, aggregate, and detect logs from all sources in real time, and we can set policies which can help us to detect abnormal or suspicious behavior and to be able to prevent any kind of suspicious event. The vulnerability scanner is a tool which can help us to assess the entire IT landscape from security vulnerabilities. We know that every day there are new vulnerabilities coming from zero-day attacks and known vulnerabilities, and we should be able to detect them and prevent from any kind of exploit. The conditional access policies are very good in this hybrid environment because we can set additional measures like multi-factor authentication when a user is accessing our corporate services to take as a two-step verification. And also we can set location-based access policies. And the last slide is about the secure system architecture and engineering principles. So how organization can eliminate security threats to information systems by securing system engineering principles and techniques. If these security principles should be part of all phases when a system is introduced in the company, like from the testing phase, in production phase, and also after when it's running. So different type of techniques can be taken into consideration when a system is going through the life cycle, like such as the security by design, defense in depth, fail security, usability and manageability, least privilege, and others. We should also take consideration to adopt and apply a security-focused design review process in order to detect any security vulnerabilities, as we said before, to take to perform a vulnerability scan before going to production to detect if any kind of security issues are in place. We should afterwards document and acknowledge all the security measures that do not fulfill the requirements, and to do a system hardening by implementing best security practices. Some of the criteria also to consider when designing secure engineering principles is that the need to integrate controls with specific security architecture, existing technical security infrastructure like public key infrastructure, identity management, and also data leakage prevention. Here is also important to mention the cost and the time required to satisfy these security requirements and the complexity, because we know that all these security tools and measures sometimes can be a very high cost. So we should always take balance, and not just cost, but also the end user behavior, because we need balanced approach, not to put too many security tools and to overhead our work, but to find the perfect balance between security and usability. So that's it from my part. I leave now Blagoj to continue with his presentation.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not certain. Here, do we have information if the audio system is still working? Most likely, yes. Okay, there has been an excellent overview done by Tino. What does it mean to have a secure architecture, and what does it mean to have a company which is well secured by having all the measures, both administration, but also a proper setup of a network? What are the measures required to have? Okay, is it better now? Yeah, perfect. And one of the things which is extremely important is how you set up the environment, what are the tools that you will use, how to set up the administration ways of how the employees should behave in a network or in a setup, but also what other things to be considered when we are working remotely. So one of the things in which in most of the cases when we discuss about security, is what are the tools that you're using to secure the environment. In many cases, it is a software component running somewhere. It can be also a dedicated hardware component, like dedicated firewall, dedicated router, dedicated network equipment, on which most of the tools that Tino is using on his daily work are relying. So feel free to correct me, Tino, if I'm wrong, but in many cases, you trust the tools that they act as they are designed to. Am I correct about this? Yes. But how do you know that the tools are not compromised? And that's one of the topics that I would like to cover today, and speak a little bit more about how to protect the tools so they behave as they are designed to be. In many cases, one of the wrong assumptions it is that if I put a firewall between my internal network and the internet, then I'm fully protected. And in some cases, it is true, but in most of the cases, if you don't design the complete network setup properly, then definitely you are not protected at all. Why? There are many questions that have to be taken into consideration when you're crafting any kind of a network setup or architecture. One of them is you can always have a rogue device inside which can be misused, as Tino said, when we work remotely. It is a lot of things that can be compromised. There are a lot of devices which are part of this network, especially if you connect a distant device through a VPN inside of a private or trusted environment by utilizing the VPN software that you have installed on your computer. Another thing is, for example, if someone would like to have an access to a more secure areas, the first attack will be to see what are all of the devices available and how you can compromise them. Actually, one of the first hacks that happened on a Tesla car was to find a bug within a device which was part of the Tesla car. Then by utilizing this bug, there was a possibility to have a rogue device inside of a kind of a secure environment through which access to more secure or more devices was granted. So that's how hackers are usually trying to compromise a network by finding a weak component inside of the network and then utilize it to access more other devices and maybe gain access to more secure areas within the networks. But in many cases, as I said, there is a mighty firewall or a device which we say, I'm firewalled, I'm secure, I have everything under control, but there are also many things to be considered about the firewall itself. Is it properly configured? because by default, when you buy a device, it is not always configured to your needs and to your expectations, meaning that you may accidentally open entry point which should not exist. You can also accidentally grant access to other systems which should not be granted. So having a properly configured firewall is one of the most important first steps that have to be taken into consideration, meaning that don't play with it, find a proper professional guy to do the configuration the right way from the very beginning, because when you open the firewall to the internet, the very first step is to scan all the potential issues or vulnerabilities which exist, both in a configuration or anything inside of the firewall. So it is another thing is the firewall updated with the latest configuration, meaning that you constantly evolve your network, and it is not a one-time activity that you should take care about, meaning that as the network is developing, as the company is developing, make a constant upgrades of the configuration to the latest requirements and the latest needs. Another thing is you have to constantly update the applications which are running inside of the firewall. The second part of my presentation will be what are the considerations that has to be taken care when you are using firewall software, and why it is important to have a proper care. What do you install, how you take care about the firewall software, and all the other things which are happening inside of the firewall, so you know that there is not just upload the new firmware and things will run smooth. There are more things to be considered and always take care about them. So why you need to have the latest software? Because as the hacking ecosystem is growing, there are more and more exploits found, identified, and used in order to break into a system. As Tino mentioned, there are zero-day attacks. They are already known, so most of the current equipment knows how to handle those scenarios, but there is a Heartbleed bug which was found in first in Intel CPUs, then in other CPUs. So all those vulnerabilities, as they happen, you have to upgrade your equipment in a way so it is not vulnerable to the new hacks or new ways of how to breach the security throughout the things which are identified. So take care, be in a constant communication with your vendor so you know what is the latest firmware. Do not always jump to the upgrade immediately. I think that Tino can also agree here that you have to first do trials and see how the new firmware will behave, because you may open another holes by just blindly go through the new and the latest firmware. So yeah, Tino has a lot of experience here, especially when you go with a new operating system or anything which is
BIOS, for example.
Or do any upgrades. So do the trials, see what's the behavior, see how the system will continue behaving, and then when you are certain that the new firmware is working as good or even better as the old one, then jump to the latest one. And then one of the big questions that is usually taken as granted is, I have a firewall coming from a trusted brand. There are many of those, Juniper, Cisco, and many, many others, in which we say, okay, if I buy the best equipment in the world, I will be secured. But how does a big company like Cisco or the other ones secure that the software running on the hardware itself is properly protected and it is not compromised? Because in order to have a firewall or router or whatever it is working properly, you have to secure that the software running inside of this device is not compromised. So there are many mechanisms, there are many ways how to do it. There are many things which are happening inside of a device in order to have a properly verified software that it is not compromised and that the hardware is not compromised. So in many of the latest network equipment, there is Linux-based environment in which you have a lot of native applications like IP tables, which is also part of the user space configuration tools. You can have a routing, configuration applications, and many, many other applications which are running on top of a standard firewall. Even the standard web server, which you're using in many cases to access and configure the firewall, it is one of the applications. But before having these applications running, And before having a possibility to utilize the encryption mechanisms, the application itself has to be contained in a well and properly configured running environment. And this application should has the possibility to access only a predefined set of functionalities, meaning that you have to secure that this application, if becomes compromised, cannot make a damage to the rest of the system components. Another view is, for example, one of the most used library within Linux is OpenSSL. So it is communicating with a lot of different underlying components before it gains access to crypto framework and then through the hardware driver to jump into the secure environment through which there are possibilities to initiate an SSL communication, exchange certificates, or verify that a running component is not compromised. What is, if we go a little bit deeper into understanding how are all of those things achieved, it is you have to build a root of trust from which you say, when I have the router up and running, all the software on the router is verified and not compromised. But then when you power up a router, how do you know that everything is genuine? And in the meantime, someone has not disassembled the router, changed the firmware inside, and started analyzing what is happening inside. So it is a chain of trust in which you have, after the hardware reset, you are executing component, a software component, which is embedded within the chipset itself, meaning that there is a very complex and very expensive mechanism to change the ROM code, which is a pendant to a BIOS in the computer or something which is running when you're powering up a device. It is extremely difficult to change this one. So this is a trusted software, which is then verifying and loading another component, which is a bootloader, which is then verifying and running the next component. This one is verifying that these secure operating system parts are correct and then loaded. This one is then verifying the next one. And this is a chain in which before you execute something, it has to be first verified by the prior stage in the booting process. Then how the ROM code knows that the things are properly configured. In many cases, it is sufficient to use a digital signature on top of a binary, meaning that when you power up a computer, then you have a root of trust, and this is the absolute trust to which we believe that cannot be compromised in any way. But this root of trust is then used by having a hash of a root or a public key, meaning that when you power up a device, you trust that the keys used for digital signatures are not compromised or changed. You power up the computer, then you take the first binary, which is usually a bootloader. It is a binary file, and that one is usually either compressed, encrypted, or it can be just digitally signed with the metadata, which is coming together with it. So you load the binary, you see what is the digital signature of that one. If the signature is correct, then you start with using all the components, and then you trust all the keys which are part of this complete environment. And this goes once again in a chain. You have a root of trust, which can be considered as a certificate authority through which you can verify each and every other keys or binaries that you are loading and executing. And then at the end, the target data can be an operating system or whichever part of the software that you would like to have it running. What is important to notice here is that it may seem simple, but in many cases, it's quite difficult to change how a key is used or how a key is created. As Tino said, in many cases, there are possibilities to maybe tamper with something, but then what is important to have a constant monitoring that all the things are running in a proper way, meaning that whenever you have a software up and running, there are additional hardware components, usually those ones, which constantly scan and verify for changes, both in the memory or within the execution path. You may pass a step successfully, and then you may introduce a side channel attack, which will introduce another software component during the booting process. But since you have a components which are constantly scanning and monitoring for changes, if they see that if something is suspicious, then they will alert and put the hardware in a predefined state by not giving and granting access to the more secure areas. So if we go back here, one of the things which is important here is if you break a chain of trust here, then there are possibilities to introduce different types of hacks, vulnerabilities, or attacks, but it is not shown here in a very distinct way. But in many cases, what you do is you have a set of keys and you use the key per different types of user scenarios, meaning one key is used to verify all the software, another key is used to initiate an SSL communication, third key can be initiated for a firmware upgrade, meaning that it is not simple to break everything at once, and all of those activities are interconnected, meaning that if you are to initiate an SSL communication, you have to verify that all the software is running properly. So it is an intermix of different sets of activities which are granting access only to the trusted sources, and they are actually guaranteeing that there is no tampering of the software. And what is extremely important is, Tino mentioned previously, you should not hide the information behind 12 doors and make it inaccessible for everybody that has to gain access to those things, but you have to have a well-defined mechanisms which are as resilient as possible to the attacks, and the only trust or the only secret is the key, meaning that you should have the most complex mechanisms, but they have to be unlocked if you have the proper key. And in many cases, what I have seen in the past, and I have seen a lot of hacking attacks, it is not when a hacker is compromising a system, it is not compromising the algorithms. So far, all the encryption mechanisms, all the algorithms are not compromised. There are some statistical methods that can be used to do the brute forcing, but it may take a lot of time. However, the hackers are usually attacking the implementation models, meaning that the mathematicians, they may make the most resilient algorithm or the most resilient calculation model, but when the implementation is not done properly, then the hackers are usually attacking the implementation itself, not the algorithm, since so far the algorithms haven't been broken at all. And this is the last slide on my side. I think we will have some time afterwards for questions and answers. This is a flow how you start from the secure booting. So the secure boot function is first verifying the operating system and the kernel. Then the secure boot content certificate is used to verify all the certificates and everything which will be used to verify different types of applications. So first, the CPU is executing the software as part of the ROM code or the BIOS as it can be seen in the modern PCs. Then this is executed from the BIOS. This one is loading components in internal static RAM of a chip, which is verified. And when this one is verified and executing, there are things pushed into the external memory in which you may have different additional applications and different additional configurations loaded. When the secure software is loaded, then you go to the applications which are not verified, and this can be something that cannot make a damage to the system. Usually within the secure systems, this does not exist. This part does not exist. Everything is verified, but there are exceptions in which you would like to have things which are not verified prior execution. The reasons why there are some things that are not verified is because that can be a large chunk of data, like image or graphics or something which is not needed, and verifying it will take a lot of time. Therefore, it is not verified before it is used, but there are mechanisms that can, as I said, the hardware monitoring components will constantly verify if there are attempts to tamper with the hardware and if there are rogue applications running on the system. And yeah, things are coming usually when you load things from the external storages. They are something that can be changed, but there have to be a lot of mechanisms inside of the booting process, which will first load an application into the memory, verify that one, and if the application is correct, then you will execute it. One thing that has to be considered always when you are loading and verifying a binary or an application, you're not allowed to load the complete application at once, and you have to load chunks which are not executable, because you may have a situation, and that is one of the hacks that is usually used. You load something from a storage into the RAM memory. It is verified that it is not correct, but there are side channel attacks in which you can skip the step of throwing away what was loaded and start executing it. Therefore, what you do, you load first the second part of the application, you verify that that one is correct or not, and then you load just a tiny chunk of application at the very beginning, which is required to initialize the complete application. And if you do the attack, as I said, load and then make a side channel attack, you will load the second part, you will see that things are not good. You can jump to the very beginning, which is still empty, and then you will not have a possibility to execute the application. Therefore, you load almost the complete application, but the second part and the initialization part of the application is loaded and verified as the last step in this process. There are many things that we can cover and discuss about how you can protect yourself from some of the things. One of the very important activity when you do a firmware upgrade on your firewall, router, or whatever component it is within your network, only download things from a trusted source and never ever try using software which is coming from untrusted resources, but they can because they have extra features or something is free of charge. This will be pretty much all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Have a nice day.